Thank you. Okay, so Charlotte says table, like table a discussion, stop the discussion temporarily. Table that you eat on. That's the link to the slides for today. What are they? Think about your content area. How might you use the word table, data table? How many different uses for the word table can you think of? There are still more. All right, it is 7:47, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So you did bring up several uses of the word, different uses of the word table. There are many, right? Table the discussion in math, find the value of X on the table. So, someone mentioned that a table of contents or a water table. And then these idiomatic expressions, right? On the table, that's on the table, that's off the table, or paying you under the table, right? All of these different ways that we use the word table. That seems like a very simple word that we encounter and that we expect our students to know. But for our multilingual students, they might not know all of these meanings of the word, right? Polysemous words are words that have many different meanings. And so we just want to be thinking as we're pondering the vocabulary that we are instructing our students in, we want to be thinking about what are the ways that they might encounter this word across content areas and in their everyday lives. So even when it's a simple word like table, we want to just have that lens of like, how might my students understand this word and how might this be confusing for my students? So as always, we are going to, if you have questions, we would love to hear them. Just please pop them in the document. Gloria put the link to the slides in the chat and she'll be monitoring and answering those questions throughout the session. Today, we're working on our strategic goal of progress on standards. We want all of our students to make progress and the way that we're going to do that is to consistently use high leverage teaching strategies in all content and course areas and courses across all grade levels. So the high leverage strategy that we're working on today, excuse me, is explicitly teaching vocabulary and academic vocabulary. So when we're talking about vocabulary, how do we know which words we want to teach? Right. So how do we determine which words we teach? And then how do we teach vocabulary so that students will actually use it? Because what we often find is vocabulary instruction, like other aspects of our curriculum, must be taught for depth and transfer, right? Too many children and adolescents experience vocabulary instruction as making passing acquaintances with a wide range of words, right? They might sort of know them or have heard them, and they know that many of the words that they encounter in instruction won't be used again, and then there might be a new list next week. So we want to really be mindful of the words that we're choosing to teach our students, and so that they are high utility words that they will encounter. So what does it mean to know a word? A lot of students will think, okay, I know what that word means. I can use that word in a sentence, right? But we really want to push down to no, really precise understanding of what a word means. Can they give examples and non-examples? Can they use that word in their speaking and in their writing? Right. So that's our goal for today. We want to learn. I'm going to show you a routine for introducing words, and we're going to really talk about how to determine which words to teach, and then a routine for choosing or for instructing on those words, and then some other activities for deeper learning. Okay, so before we do that, why do we need to teach vocabulary, right? Why is this so important that we want to invest time doing this, even in our content area classes? So a 6-year-old, an average 6-year-old will have 8,000 words. And by the time they get to high school, they will have learned 50,000 words by the time they graduate from high school, right? They learn about 3,000 to 5,000 words per year. And that's important because comprehension of text and when I say text, I mean video, speeches, written text, word problems and math, all of that is encompassed in the word text as I'm using it in this presentation. So comprehension really depends on knowing between 90 and 95% of those words. So for our multilingual learners, especially, it's really important that we make sure that we are teaching those words and exposing them to a lot of words and directly, explicitly instructing on those words for our multilingual learners and our striving readers so that they can close that gap and make sure that they know as many words as possible by the end of high school. So which words should we teach? As always, we're going to begin with the end in mind. You really want to think about your learning goals for your lesson and your unit. Okay, so ask yourself, is it really essential to the understanding of a key concept in the unit or in the discipline? And do you want your students to use it? Do you want them to produce it in their writing or their discussions? So we really want to think about how essential it is and how useful it is. So Isabel Beck and her colleagues came up with a way to categorize words. We call these tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 words. These are unrelated to the MTSS tiers. So they are not, it's not a sequence, right? It's not linear. It's not like students have to learn all of tier 1 and then go to tier 2 and then go to tier 3. This happens simultaneously, right? Even your newer students who are in your biology class have learned what photosynthesis is, or a molecule, or in math, they've learned what an isosceles triangle is, even if they don't know, if they're still unfamiliar with a lot of what you would consider basic everyday language. Okay, so your tier 1 is your basic everyday language. Tier 2 is your academic vocabulary that cuts across content, and tier 3 is really content specific. So when we're thinking about content specific words, right, we teach these in our content area classes. And when we're doing that with multilingual learners, one important consideration is if you look at these words, what do you notice about the bottom row, right? How is the word power used in math or science or social studies? Just drop in the chat, how would you define the word power in your content area? Right, in math, it's exponents, thank you. And what might power look like in a physics class, right? What might power look like in a social studies class? Those are very different definitions of the same words. Thank you, Jessica. Power is part of the definition of what government is. Power in physics is energy transferred per second. Okay, so thinking about, and in English, in language arts, it's influence, Courtney says. So when you are talking about power, right, we might not think to define that for our students or draw their attention to the fact that this might be a totally different word in another content area. So just adopting that lens of how will my students encounter and experience these words across content, right? So if I'm teaching them that it's an exponent in math, I should just tell them like this, you will encounter different definitions for this word in different content areas. It's the same word, it has multiple meanings. Okay. So we really want to excuse me, we really want to focus on tier 2. Tier 2 are high utility words. You find them across content areas. There is a resources here for you to determine which words are tier 2 until you get more familiar with it. There's an academic word list that someone in New Zealand for her master's thesis, she did a survey of all the most frequent words that appear in academic texts across all content areas and published the word list. And she has them by word families. It's actually a really neat tool. And there's an academic word finder tool from an Achieve the Course. So we'll look at that more in our co-planning sessions. But look at these words, right? They're words that you would find the word parallel in math. You would also find it in the language arts class. You would find hypothesis in science and across other content areas with a slightly different meaning. So we want to invest time in teaching these words because these are words that our students will see in many different areas of study and can use in different areas of study. Okay, so this is going to be our real focus for today is our tier 2 words. Okay, so which words should we explicitly teach? The two main criteria are that it is essential, right? If it is not essential for the student to understand the text that you're having them read or the lesson or the lab that you're having them do, then you don't need to explicitly teach it. You might just provide a visual, you might provide a little definition in the margin, right? There are other ways that you might provide a translation, right? Different ways that they can access those words without you having to spend time on teaching it. We're talking about which words do we want to invest time in to teach so that they will actually use them. So one is that it is essential to your learning goals. The second is that it is high utility, right? We want it to be useful. Will they need to use it in discussion, in reading, or in writing? Do I want to see this word in their essay at the end of the unit? Do I want to see this word in their lab report? And is it a tier 2 word that they're going to be able to use across contents? The other consideration for utility is if they are going to see it on a test. Um, I had an experience once where my students were taking the SBAC, and the question was, what conclusions can be drawn about the main character in the text? And my students looked at me and asked where the box was to draw their picture, because they didn't, even though they knew that a conclusion was the final paragraph of their essay, they did not know what the phrase to draw a conclusion meant. Okay, so watching out for those idiomatic phrases, even though they're familiar with the word conclusion, they might not understand that phrase. That's why when we, in the first section here, where it says essential, is the word or phrase critical to understanding? So sometimes we need to be thinking about, is this a word or phrase that they're going to see on the SAT, ACT, any of their IB, AP exams? You know, it might not be useful for your immediate content, but you might need to teach it just because it is going to be useful for a test. And also watching out for those phrases that are idiomatic. And then looking at frequency. Okay, so if it meets these two criteria, great, you're going to teach. That's a word that you might teach. However, if the students can figure out the word from the context of the text, we don't want to be explicitly teaching that word. Right? We don't want to take away opportunities for students to use their reading skills. We don't want to be giving them too much. So if they can use context clues and figure it out, then do not explicitly teach it. But watch to make sure, maybe add a question in there about what that word means to make sure that they're picking up on the context, because you might need to model that. The other way that they can access word meaning is structural analysis. Are they using their knowledge of root words and being able to analyze what the meaning of words is? If I have taught the word benefit and I've taught the root word ben, and the word benefactor or benevolent is in the text, I'm not going to teach that word if I want them to figure out that, okay, means good, right? So I want them to use that structural analysis to learn that word. If I haven't taught them that, I might want to choose that word as an opportunity to model that structural analysis, but I don't want to rob them of that opportunity, right? I want to monitor that and be mindful and watch for them to do that on their own, because we want them to become independent readers. And then polysemy, just does the word have multiple meanings? You might not need to explicitly teach it, but you need to watch out for it and make sure that you're communicating to your students, like, this word in this text means this. In science, it'll mean this other, it'll have this other meaning. All right, so we're going to quickly look at an example. I am choosing words from this text. This is just a text from Common Lit called The Story Behind Your Dreams. I'm looking for words that are essential for understanding, that students will need to use, and they can't figure it out from context clues or roots and affixes and cognates, right? So normally I would have you look at this text, but because we're short on time, you're going to have an opportunity to do that during your co-planning time. You're going to do it with your own text and your own units. But I have divided these words into tiers. Okay? It's really important to note when you're doing this that these tiers are not cut and dry, right? You could argue that benefits goes in tier 2, right? Because that could be considered a high utility word. So the different people might come up with slightly different lists in the different tiers, and that's okay. It's not a scientific process. It's more of a tool for us to be thinking about how we think about the text and the vocabulary that we're going to teach them from the text that we're using. So you are going to choose 3 to 5 words to teach explicitly before they read the text or do the lesson. Okay, we really want to focus on those tier 2 words because those are the words that are really going to give us more bang for our buck, right? So each word I'm going to show you an explicit vocabulary routine that takes 2 minutes per word. Okay, this is just one way. So this is a 6-step routine adapted from Margarita Calderon. And in her routine, everything is oral, right? To save time, the students are not writing anything down. And it's very teacher directed. It's very quick. So the teacher says the word, models the pronunciation, and asks the student to repeat it 3 times. That way the teacher's showing them what the word sounds like, and the students are practicing it, right? And the teacher is walking around as the students are saying the word and listening. Are they pronouncing it correctly? Okay. Then the teacher states the word in context. You take the sentence from the text that you're reading, it could be the directions for your task, and you put it up on the board. And the teacher reads it. Then you explain the meaning with a student-friendly definition. If you want to do a dictionary definition and then a student-friendly definition, that's fine. But we really do need the students to access the definition, so student-friendly is the way to go. You can add in an extra quick step and add the dictionary definition if you choose. But we don't want students looking up the word. We're going to just give it to them. Okay, then you want to choose maybe one feature to highlight about that word, right? What part of speech is it? Is it a multiple meaning word? What other meanings will it have in other content areas? Is it a cognate, right? If I'm teaching benefit, I would probably not teach beneficio, but like you might just, if it has a cognate that the student would know in their native language, then you can use that to teach the word. Does it have a different meaning in another subject? Things like that. So students then engage in a teacher-provided sentence starter or frame using the target vocabulary for 60 seconds. So it's really important that with this routine, steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 6 are all 1 minute together. The students have 1 whole minute to practice the words, because the only way that we're going to get them to use the words is if we have them practice. Okay, so this step 5 is really the most important step. After they do that, you're going to tell them when they're going to say the word and how you want them to use it. Okay, you want to hold them accountable for using that word. Okay, so Gloria's going to be my student, and we're going to model what this might look like for a word that I chose from my text. Okay, so remember choosing 3 to 5 words and 2 minutes a word. Okay, Gloria, say theorize.
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 Excellent. So in our text today by Ben Slivnik, the dreams, it says, dreams might allow people to get the sleep they need, theorizes South African scientist Mark Solms. Theorize means to come up with an idea that explains why something happens. So theorize means to come up with an idea that explains why something happens. Okay? Theorize is a verb. A verb shows actions or state of being. So a verb is something that you do, right? Theorize is an action that's taking place inside our brain, right? So theorize is an action that's happening in our brain. And this verb is in the present tense. Okay? Now we're going to rally Robin. We can theorize about UFOs because no one knows for sure. Your turn, Gloria.
We can theorize about UFOs because no one knows for sure.
Great. Now can you fill in this blank with an idea of your own? Like this.
We can theorize about dinosaurs because no one knows for sure.
Excellent. We can theorize about dogs' cognitive abilities because no one knows for sure. Thank you. Okay. So after you read today, I want you to summarize the text and use at least 3 of the 5 words in your exit ticket summary. Okay, so your students might produce something in the end that looks like that. And so they're using students to theorize about why we dream, trying to make sense of the images and stories we process as we sleep. So they've underlined the words that you've explicitly taught them. Okay. So the key takeaways with this routine and with all vocabulary learning that you do in your classrooms, we want to avoid asking students, who can tell me what this word means? Do you know what this means? What does it mean? Right? Students guessing may waste time. And more importantly, every time you ask them what the word means and they're recalling what they think the word means, that is forming neural pathways in their brain. So when it's going to make it more difficult when you teach them the accurate definition, for them to recall the accurate definition. They get confused with the words associations that they've already recalled, right? Because we know that when we ask students to recall information, that it helps them remember that information. So when we are asking them to recall, we want them recalling the accurate information. So do not have them guess at word meanings, just tell them what it means. Give students the definitions of the words rather than having them look it up. It just saves time and avoids any confusion about them using the incorrect definition, especially for those multiple meaning words. You want to tell them which meaning you are using in your text or in your discipline. And use student-friendly definitions. Okay, Collins Dictionary that's linked here is an excellent source for that. AI also makes excellent definitions. Okay, so what if we don't know which words the students don't know, right? Like we want to choose words that they're unfamiliar with, but how do we know? And different students might have different tiers, right? Different students are going to be unfamiliar with different words. So you can have students rate their knowledge of the word, right? From like, I've never heard this word before to I totally know this word and I can teach it to someone else. And when you're starting the text, you can have them, the first step before you read, I want you to go through and circle any unfamiliar words. You will find that many students start reading. So sometimes it helps to say, I want you to read back to front, read it backwards, and circle all the words that you find unfamiliar. That way they won't start reading the text and forget what you asked them to do. It's important to use the word unfamiliar when you're talking about words that they don't know, because they think they know a lot of words and they might not be very willing to admit that they don't know a word. So sometimes you say, I want you to just, if you're not sure what it means, circle it. And you might need to set a goal. I need everybody to find 5, right? If you have looked at that text and you know that there are unfamiliar words to students in there, make sure that you say, like, I want everybody to find 5, and that will give you a good list of what students do and don't know, right? If you don't set a goal for them, sometimes they'll just say, I know all these words. All right, so after you have pre-taught the words, they've read the text, and they have used the words in some way that you have decided. There are you could use other strategies, games. You want to keep these words in rotation. You want to keep them on a word wall. You would keep them on your walls. The students could keep them in a vocabulary notebook, right? I might extend the learning. When I introduce the word, I do it very quickly and I'm not reviewing every part of speech. Afterwards, I might want them to look at the different, at the whole word family, right? I might want them to know that, to be able to use the word more flexibly. But I'm not going to do that in that routine. Okay. Everybody's familiar with the Freyer model. It's another, if you really want them to have knowledge of the word, using the examples and non-examples is a great way to do that. If you use a note-taking scaffold for your students, that can help, especially with your lower level, lower proficiency English learners. Okay. Also, graphic organizers, you can partially fill these in as well, right? You can put the word in here, you can put the part of speech for them, and you can put sentence frames for examples and have them practice, right? So if you have something like your word wall in science that looks like this already, then it's more just them practicing. We really want to provide students with sentence frames that embed the meaning of the word to have them practice, right? We want them to be using the word. Okay, so this is an example of what that might look like if you've partially filled it in. Right, crumbs on the I use the word blank is evidence that blank. So you want to see them actually producing and practicing with the word. So instead of we're shifting our time from kids looking up the words and writing down the definitions to giving them the definitions and using those words. And this is another way to do it. So there are many ways to do this. There's no one right way. We just want to put our focus on them using it. You can have them create these resources, right? You can have them draw an image. You can have them you want to give them the sentence frame and have them do the example. You can have your higher level students writing some of these sentence frames, right? So there are lots of different ways that this can work in your classroom with your students. We just want to make sure that they are using the vocabulary and that you are expecting them to use the vocabulary. So if you're having a written response, put in the rubric, or put in the, you need to use the target vocabulary, XYZ, whatever those words are that you have taught them and are now requiring them to use. You want to hold them accountable for using them. Okay. Another great resource, especially in science, is root words, affixes, and cognates, right? I think something like 90% of the terms in science can be figured out with root words. So teaching these explicitly can really go a long way in your content areas. The one caveat is that for some of these roots, students, if you're using cognates like benefit, beneficio, those are similar words in English and Spanish. If students don't know the word in Spanish, for science content, a lot of the times they won't know. Like photosynthesis sounds the same in English and Spanish, but they still might not know probably don't know what photosynthesis means in Spanish. So looking at the root of the word photo, right, means light. How does that play in photosynthesis? So that would be more beneficial for them. You can also, if you've taught beneficial, you've taught the root word ben, and they're going to come across the word benediction or benevolent, then you can remind them like to remember the word by like what does it sound like in their language or the language that they're learning, because a lot of our students are learning Spanish, right? So ben sounds like bien, right? That reminds me of the word bien in Spanish. You know the word bien means well, right? So that's the way that you can remember those root words. A lot of times the roots in Spanish will be used for more common words than the roots that we encounter in English. So a lot of times they can access more common words in Spanish that then they can leverage for understanding more tier 2, tier 3 words in English. Okay, so tomorrow we have our math and science co-planning session. So you'll bring your assessments and your texts that you want to do your vocabulary planning for, and you have co-planning time with your co-teacher. Next Wednesday is the co-planning session for language arts and social studies. Those kickups are linked on this slide. And these are some resources. The academic word finder tool is here, the academic word list. Jeff Spires has lots of really great resources. So we'll be giving a lot of resources out at the co-planning session. Melissa Shell has already made a lot of the word walls for the science content area teachers. So those are all filled out for you for units 3 and 4 that you can use with your students. If you have any questions, that's our contact information, and you can drop them in the chat right now, but I know that you have a lot to do. So thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you in person.